All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a good weekend. The new week has started. All right, so we're going to be talking about business continuity planning today. All right, so just kind of go over what we'll be discussing. Project scope and planning. And we'll talk about business impact analysis, which we pretty much did last class, if you recall. Talk about continuity planning, planning to make sure that our business operations can continue. That's all that business continuity planning is about. And then lastly, we'll talk about plan approval and implementation. All right, so why do we want to bother to do business continuity planning? There's a couple major reasons. Okay, number one, lots of sort of natural disaster events. Okay, I've got some listed up here. There's probably many others. Think about something like when the government shuts down your operations. They say you cannot leave your house. Okay, that's arguably man-made, arguably natural disaster. I'm not going to go into that debate right now. But that's another thing we could add up here, is it not? Okay. If you can't have your employees come into a physical location, how do you respond to that? Certainly many ways, right? Okay, so one way could be having e-work agreements in place in the event of an emergency. Just assume that you go ahead and do that. That's certainly one way. Another way may be that you have furloughs in place. Certainly some employees may not like those, but some employees may like a break. So there's certainly lots of ways to address these sort of things. I got floods, tornadoes, fires, earthquakes, any bad weather, that sort of stuff. Fires can be caused, of course, by nature, and they can also be caused by people. Okay? Be caused accidentally by people or on purpose by people. All right? Lots of possible causes for fires. Let's say it's a dry season, and let's say lightning strikes. Could that cause a fire? I think so. Let's say you got a deranged lunatic. Okay, could that cause a fire? Yeah. All right. Let's say you got someone who's irresponsible. They're outside doing a campfire. Okay, and they don't really pay attention to it. Next thing you know, you got a forest fire. Can that happen? Sure can. Okay. These are all bummers, aren't they? Okay. Thought I was going to come on Monday. A lot of good, exciting news. Well, maybe Tuesday's class. How about that? All right. Poor engineering. All right. Say you got a bridge. Let's say it's engineered poorly. Let's say it collapses. Or let's say it's unsafe to drive on. Okay, think about what happened up in Memphis. You guys follow us at I-95? You guys follow that? So basically there's a bridge between Memphis and Arkansas. All right, and it had some problems. They didn't let people drive on it. Okay, that was a disaster. Why was it a disaster? Did it collapse all the way? Well, either way, certainly the impact of it is going to be pretty severe. Okay, you got hundreds of thousands of people going each way from Memphis to Arkansas, and vice versa. You got to route all those people around a bridge. Okay, that's not easy to do. So certainly commute times and certainly travel times, anything like that, delivery, it all becomes a lot more difficult. All right, and on top of that, what's a major company headquartered in Memphis? It's not UPS, it's FedEx. All right. So, anyone ever been to Memphis International? It's an okay airport, not the best, not the worst. But if you ever get a chance to go, one wing of it, or I guess terminal is probably a better word, the entire terminal is devoted to FedEx. Okay, so imagine how many, FedEx trucks, big semis, are going from Arkansas to Memphis. You see how that could cause some problems? Okay, that's the sort of stuff we're planning around. Okay, I think terrorism and crime are pretty self-explanatory. I got a quote up here, okay? Quote says, "Not preventing an act of God, planning ahead to continue operations." That's what this is all about, okay? You know, you can't, at least with current technology, you can't change the weather, okay? You can't, I mean, they say only you can prevent forest fires, but if you're the only one, you're sitting in here, you're not preventing a forest fire, are you? Okay? That's a bad joke for the day. But it goes to show, you know, we have, what, 7-8 billion people on Earth? Bound to get a few crazies, bound to get a few irresponsible people, okay? So, you can't prevent that sort of stuff. The whole purpose of business continuity planning is not preventing anything, okay? Maybe a couple things here and there we choose to prevent, but by and large, it's all about making sure we can continue business operations, okay? Nothing is better than a profitable company, okay? Nothing. All right, don't forget that. All right, talking about project scope and planning. Here's the different phases we're going to discuss. You start off by reviewing the organization. So specifically, you're going to review it from the perspective of, if something happened, how would it respond as is? Okay, and this is going to be focused a lot on the primary business activities and also some of the support activities. Probably not all the support activities. So for instance, let's say that for whatever reason, pick your disaster, people are not able to attend in a building. Okay? So, you know, usually something like janitorial, cleaning, whatever you want to call it. Okay? Usually that's going to be a support activity, right? If you can't attend the building anyways, does it really matter if the trash is taken out? I mean, let's just be honest. Does it matter? Why not? Because you can't attend it anyway. You know, you're certainly not anyone present. All right, so you're going to think about it from that perspective. You're going to assemble a BCP team, okay, business continuity planning team. Okay, this team should be comprised of people from all across the organization. So you're going to have maybe 1 or 2 from IT. You're going to have 1 or 2 from the primary business activity. 1 or 2 from human resources, maybe 1 from legal. You get the point. Okay. So the book list gets senior management approval after the BCP team. I'll be quite honest with you. Okay, I think you should probably get senior management approval before you assemble a team. Why do I say that? Yeah, so what if the senior management says, no, we're not going to let you do that? You know, you just wasted resources. You assembled a team for nothing. So I would probably say, you know, I would put this certainly above BCP team creation, possibly even above reviewing the organization. That's my opinion. It's okay to disagree. You know, different organizations view things differently. All right, assign resources. Pretty self-explanatory there. You know, wherever the resources are needed, obviously that's where you're going to assign them. Okay, you're going to present the findings. Of course, you're going to start off presenting to top management team, also known as C-level. And once they've approved everything, you start to disseminate the information more throughout the organization. In a lot of cases, it'll go out to managers, and they will inform the employees, but not always. Depends on how flat the organization is. Okay, let's say you're at a very flat organization. How might that change if you're at a very hierarchical organization? How might that approach change? Everyone understand the difference between a flat organization and hierarchical? So how would your approach to disseminating information change in those two? Yeah, so the hierarchical, you start off with a top management team, right? Okay, and then you'd probably go down to director level, right? And then possibly the directors would go to their managers, or possibly it would just, you would go. But either way, it's going to be very hierarchical. Okay, in a flat organization, basically everyone has for the most part, about the same amount of authority. And maybe you just send out a company-wide email. Okay? Like I say, there's no hard-cut rules in this sort of stuff for how you do it because each organization is very different. Okay? And lastly, make corrections. Okay, there's going to be a testing phase involved. There's also going to be the possibility there may be an unplanned testing phase. What I mean by unplanned is that, some disaster happens. Okay, that certainly puts the test on things, does it not? All right. So, organizational review. A couple key parts here. You definitely want to make sure that you're considering all the different functional units within the company. Okay, if you leave out an important functional unit, what will happen? Okay, you may leave out something important. So you want to consider that. But, probably most important, it's going to be the operational. It's going to be the operational department. So think back to like, the port of value chain where you have primary business activities. Why is that more important than everything else in a profit-seeking company? Yeah, it's what makes you money. Okay, if you're not having any revenue, let's face it, most companies are not going to survive more than 2 to 3 months without revenue, right? Okay, because what's the point of holding on to a bunch of cash? There are advantages to it, but are there not more disadvantages than advantages? I think so. So certainly consider operational first. Then, think about your critical support services. So, what might that be? Certainly anything that is going to be critical to the needs of the organization. I would probably say that IT is going to be very central to that, making sure people can access the technological resources that the company provides. I would say human resources is going to be pretty important as well, okay? Because let's face it, if your company is not able to do stuff like payroll, is anyone going to be motivated at all? Okay, probably not, So, critical support services. What are some other critical support services we may think of? So, we talked about human resources a little bit. We also talked about IT. What are a couple others? How about legal? Okay. So if you're breaking laws and regulations, could that put your company in a lot of danger? Absolutely. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're not breaking any laws. Or at least you're not breaking any laws in a manner likely to get you caught. Okay. I never advocate for breaking laws. I'll be very clear about that. But if you're going to break laws, you might as well do it and not get caught, right? Okay. I think everyone understands what I'm saying when I say that. Whoops, we still had more stuff on here. Okay, so also think about a physical security team. All right, so you have to secure the physical premise. So that could be a very important thing to think about in any sort of natural disaster. Think about Hurricane Katrina. Okay, were you guys alive for Hurricane Katrina? So, what happened is that after the hurricane, there's no power for weeks in some places. No water. Well, there was water, but not, not obviously drinking water. Okay. A lot of problems. But another big problem, okay, I'm just going to say it. People broke into quite a few places down there, right? So physical security is going to be important. Now, let's say we have a big building. And let's say we have insurance, but let's say we didn't carefully review the policy and it excludes looting. Okay, is that going to be a big problem for us in a disaster? Yeah, obviously. Okay, so we have physical security. We board everything up very well. We certainly would obviously lock everything up. Could that mitigate a lot of threats of looting? Yeah. Okay, it's opportunistic, smash and grab type deal. All right. Basic physical security should mitigate a lot of that. Will it mitigate it all? No, nothing will. But do what you can. Okay, then lastly, think about your C-level / senior executives. They're going to be vital because they're going to be the ones who ultimately provide support, or they don't provide support. If they don't provide support, the entire process is dead, right? So if it's dead, that means you don't do anything. So you'd certainly want to avoid that. We talked about making sure it's representative of the firm. Okay, you're not just focusing entirely on the primary business activity, because let's face it, you cannot have a firm with exclusively primary business activity, right? So theoretically, it is possible. Okay, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But in practice, we start talking about, compliance with regulations and all that stuff. Is it really possible in 2022 to have a firm that is exclusively primary business activity? I think about the only way I think it'd be possible is if you had a firm. Let's draw a firm up here, and they exclusively use 1099. Okay, so they're exclusively using 1099 contractors. Could they only select contractors who are doing their primary business activity? Is that possible? Okay, that's probably not legal in a lot of places. Just being honest. Okay, not legal advice, anything in here. I can't imagine you could get away with doing that. Not to mention that'd be a disaster of a company, would it not? Okay, so you need to have some support activities. Should you have a lot of support activities? What do y'all think about that? So, according to a lot of business theory, you should minimize your support activities, right? Why? So, they're a cost, and they're not driving what? Revenue. Okay? Those are the two, I wouldn't say the most important things in business. They're pretty important though, right? Cost and revenue. Because, simplification here, but if we take revenue, subtract off cost, what does that approximately give us? Profit. Like I said, not a finance class. We're not going to go into all the specifics there, but you get the idea. All right? So I also say to get older employees. Now, older has nothing to do with age in this context. Probably a correlation, but nothing in, I'm not saying go find a 60-year-old and put him on the committee. Okay, what I'm saying is find employees who've been with a company for a long time. They know the ins and outs of the organization. They're not likely to leave in the next couple of years because they've been with the company for so long. Okay? So for instance, if Fort Lewis were doing a business continuity plan, do you think they'd have me or do you think they'd have Paul on the committee? Would it not make a lot more sense to have Paul on the committee than me? Okay? Being honest, he's certainly a lot more senior to Fort Lewis than I am. Okay? So it's also important to pick people who can work together. You can certainly imagine a situation where you had a team who hated each other's guts and nothing ever got done. That'd be a big problem, would it not? So pick people who can work together. All right, resources. This is probably the most obvious thing we're going to talk about today. So there's three major components to this. So for the team itself, obviously you need to have financial resources associated with it. Maybe you need to do a basic study on something. Who knows? Probably going to be some sort of not a huge amount though. Okay. What's going to be a much larger requirement is time. Okay. So if I get, a couple top management members, if I get, just people from across the organization, we're going to be spending a lot of time brainstorming this stuff. That's going to take a lot of time. Okay. Not to mention, a lot of the employees there are not going to be, employees making minimum wage. Let's just say it that way. Okay, some of these employees are going to be quite highly compensated. That means what? It means their time's worth a lot of money, right? So why does that matter? Why does it matter? So why does it matter that it takes a lot of time to do this? The time is money, and it also means you have to have a very strong organizational commitment to this process. Okay, like I say, I disagree with the book where it says, the third or fourth step should be to get top management approval. No, it should be the first step in my opinion. Feel free to disagree, but, I think that makes a lot more sense than, getting all this far and then saying, oh, you can't have any resources. You see what I'm saying? And of course, in most organizations, are you going to go straight to the CEO and ask that? No, you're probably going to go through your boss is going to go through his boss, and so on and so forth. Okay, eventually it'll get up there, but in most companies, you're not supposed to really walk into the CEO's office and be like, got a proposal for you. Okay, that's not how it works. Does everyone understand that? All right. So you got the development. That's obviously the first step. They're going to develop the whole plan. We talked about that. Then they're going to test it. You guys ever watch Parks and Rec? You guys remember the scene in Parks and Rec where they're doing that pandemic testing thing? Okay, I think they all die. Okay, they don't actually die, obviously, but they all get infected and they all die. So that's the testing phase. Okay, you're not actually going to light the warehouse on fire, but you're going to maybe pull the fire alarm and see what happens, that sort of thing. Does that make sense? Okay, training. So you build out all these new policies. You're going to train people to use them. Okay, and then finally, once everything is sort of ironed out to a reasonable extent, it's never going to be perfect, you're going to implement it. Okay, so legal and regulatory. I would say the most important thing up here is payroll. Like we've talked about, if you don't pay people, they're going to have zero motivation to do anything. Well, I shouldn't say zero. That's a generalization, but it'll be quite low on average, right? All right, and then, beyond that, how can you reasonably have employees work? So let's say there's a flood, and let's say there's standing water of a couple inches. Is that safe to drive in? 2 or 3 inches of water, is that safe? Why not? Hydroplaning, let's face it, can cars float away in 2 or 3 inches of water? Absolutely. And you may say, well, not in 2 inches. Well, let's think about it. Okay, that 2 inches is an average number. Especially around here, the ground ain't perfectly flat, is it? There's going to be some low points. Okay, that low point may be 5 or 6 inches of water. Okay? So that could be a big problem to have people drive on. Does that make sense? So that's going to be a legal or regulatory issue. Okay, because what happens if you make someone drive on it and they total their car? Can they sue you? Yeah, sure. Will they be successful? No idea. Not a lawyer. But it's certainly possible for them to sue you for making them come in on an unsafe day. Information storage and access. If you can't be on a physical site, how can people access your company technological resources? How can they access your servers? How can they access your, let's say, cloud-hosted apps like Citrix? How can they access all that sort of stuff? Okay, you always want to consider what sort of contractual agreements your company has. So I have up here a couple different types: service level agreements, memorandums of understanding. Those are things you'd want to consider. And like I said, it's going to be highly dependent upon specific organization and their existing contractual agreements. Now, let's say you're starting and you're having the ability to write a lot of these. Should you put in contingencies to allow for natural disasters? Or any type of disaster, really? Should you? Shaking your head, why? Why do you say yeah? Yeah, a lot of stuff can go wrong, We don't know what, but we know something will, okay? If I said over the next 10 years, there will be some reason that something will happen, is that a pretty safe statement? Okay, if I said in 152 days something will happen, that's getting a little bit creepy. But if I say within 10 years, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay? So satisfy your existing contracts as much as possible. All right, we talked about this last class, so I'm not going to go into it too much today. But business impact analysis, two major types. In this class, which one of these are we doing? Quantitative or qualitative? Quantitative, that's right. Why do we not do qualitative? Why do we only do quantitative? First of all, is there a right answer with qualitative? Is there a right answer? Can I look at your qualitative work and say that's wrong? I could say certain assumptions are wrong, but I can't say the overall thing is wrong. It's just not how qualitative works. Okay, quantitative, you're going to get a very concrete figure. Okay, that's a lot more valid in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying qualitative is bad in an actual company. Okay, but that's where you're dealing with actual, scenarios, not something I made up. All right. So with this, you're always going to think about what will be impacted, how much it will be impacted. Okay? And then, the end goal is to figure out what can we do to mitigate as much as possible, if it makes sense. Does it always make sense to do any mitigation? No. Okay, so imagine that, just use me as an example here. Imagine I was afraid that people may laugh at something I don't intend people to laugh at. Let's just say that. Okay, and I can pay $2 million. Okay, am I going to pay $2 million to avoid a couple laughs here and there? Why not? Because I'm not an idiot, right? Okay, that's something an idiot would do. All right. And by the way, if you ever want to pay $2 million, let me know. Don't actually let me know. All right, so again, just to review from last class, 4 major things we could do with risk. Ignore it. That is typically ill-advised. Why? Yeah, so, if you just ignore a risk, could be something that's very cost-effective you could do. It could also be that, there's lots of reasons why you don't just ignore risk. Okay, a better option is to do risk management, go through that entire process, and then choose to accept the risk. Why is that a better option than ignoring it? Yeah, we know it's there. We know that we can do stuff. We just choose not to. Transferring of risk, what does that mean? Who remembers that? Exactly right. Okay, getting insurance is typically what we think of there. There are other types of transference, technically. A lot of them, frankly, are, certainly against regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley, or Sarbanes-Oxley, I mean. Okay, so for instance, let's say that we had a risk. Okay. Whoops. Okay, let's say we had a risk. And let's say we have a company A. Better yet, let's do company E. You guys know why I'm picking company E? You'll figure it out. Okay, so right now, risk belongs to company E. Okay, but company E decides to transfer that risk to a shell company. Let's call it company F. Okay? That's what Enron did, right? Simplified, obviously. And it wasn't necessarily exclusively risks. But that's the nutshell of it. Okay. Generally speaking, though, we're talking about insurance, which is, of course, mostly legal. All right, and then lastly, mitigate the risk. That's pretty self-explanatory. You take some preventative action to prevent some sort of damage. Okay, so different types of risk mitigation. We talked about these last classes as well. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. Physical controls, anything physical we may do. Think about like the sprinkler system example I had. Preventative controls, that's preventing something from taking place. That's going to change the likelihood of it transpiring. Okay, deterrent, it's also going to change the likelihood where you have something, usually physical in place, it doesn't have to be physical, to prevent some sort of adverse action. Okay, then we have detective. That's not going to prevent it necessarily, although I would argue in a lot of cases it can. Okay, but most likely that's in place to provide evidence that something took place, some non-reputable evidence. For example, Can you really argue with security camera footage? Is that really possible? Not really. You know, I would say I would probably try to argue with a speed camera. Okay, but that's just me. You guys know speed cameras? Would anyone else try to argue with a speed camera? Talk about the calibration or whatever. I mean, probably not going to be successful if it's worth a shot, right? Like I say, nothing in this class is legal advice. I think that goes without saying, though. Compensating. Okay, so compensating is you sort of setting funds aside, setting whatever aside to deal with it. Corrective. Let's say you got a leaky pipe. That causes a threat of stuff like mold build up, causes a threat of, you know, slip and fall sort of stuff. So you correct it. You fix the pipe, right? Does everyone understand that? Okay, recovery. It's like having a backup, making sure that you can easily recover from some sort of disaster. Okay, so that's the basic ones there. So, different phases, pretty self-explanatory. You identify any sort of priorities you may have. So obviously, number one priority should probably be your primary business activity, making sure that can continue to function. Okay, identify the risks that may be present. Okay, then you're going to go through and assign a likelihood to each of those. Okay, we did this last class. You're going to perform impact analysis, see what the impact of that will be. Okay, and then you're going to prioritize resources based on that. So, you're a company. Inherently, you have limited resources, right? Some companies have more than others. But, you know, even Apple doesn't have unlimited resources, right? There's some limit, okay? You can make an argument that a government with access to their own currency, you could make an argument that's unlimited resources. Is it truly unlimited resources, though? Okay, it's not. Why not? You guys want 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars? It's worth like a couple pennies, maybe. Okay, that's why it's not unlimited, right? Because there's inherent scarcity. It doesn't matter which economic system you're talking about, there will be scarcity. Now, you could say the exception to that could be stuff like digital distribution. Okay, so digital distribution, let's say hypothetically, I'm sure none of you have ever done this before, let's say hypothetically someone downloads a textbook. Okay, they don't pay for it. Okay, like I said, I'm sure no one's ever done that. But if you do, you just create a new copy of the textbook, right? So that's really the only case in which there's no scarcity. Okay, even water is technically scarce. It's not like highly scarce or anything, at least not in this area. At least I don't think so. But you get the point, right? Okay. So that's talking about resource prioritization. All right, continuity planning. So again, the whole goal here is not to ever get rid of disaster. That's certainly something we may try to mitigate, but the real goal is just to make sure we can continue operations. So there's two major parts to this. You have strategy development. You're going to address your prioritized concerns here. And then probably most importantly is the provisions and processes. It's where you actually build out the specific procedures you're going to go through in the event of any list of emergencies. And then you're going to consider these three things: people, places, and infrastructure. Okay, I think all that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about today, before I have a little activity, is to talk about plan approval and implementation. So, like I say, most of the time you're going to begin with your immediate supervisor. Are you always going to begin with your immediate supervisor? No. Most of the time you will. You're going to approach them, and you're going to follow the organizational hierarchy from there. Okay, so that's going to be following the best advice that your immediate supervisor gives. You know, it is technically possible to go over your immediate supervisor's head, is it not? Is that wise most of the time? No. Because you're probably not going to make them too happy if you go against what they say. Okay, so then you implement it. Like I said, follow your procedures, follow your company's stuff, provide training. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. All right, so working with 1 to 2 classmates, I'm going to pass out a little thing. a little scenario. He's going to talk about different ways that they may address natural disasters. We'll take about let's take about 10 to 12 minutes for this. So I'm just going to pass some of these out. And some of them I hand wrote. For whatever reason, the printer only gave me the first 4. So why don't you and you guys work together? Why don't you 3 work together? You and Ron can work together. I'll let you. You guys want to work 3 together or 2 together? All right, you guys can work together with 3. Like I said, I had to handwrite yours. Sorry. All right, you 2 can work together, and you 2. Good deal. So like I said, just think about stuff they may do for their business continuity plan. I don't expect a complete business continuity plan in 10 to 12 minutes, but we'll talk about these once you're done.